I don't have weapons.
Yeah, so I'm upset. I just recorded this whole thing. Got all I wanted to say. Figured out I wasn't even recording. So, let's go ahead and do this again. We're going to go review of the movie Weapons from some guy that you don't not even heard of and has 0 subscribers and just started his YouTube channel like today. So, or a couple days ago, depending when it doesn't get it out, it's probably going to be a while. We're going to start out by saying that I really liked the movie. I thought that it was great. I loved Gladys. I loved the whole theme. I thought it offered up some very interesting things. The gore was fucking sick. The scares were awesome. I'm probably the only guy in the planet or horror movie enjoyer that actually likes jump scares. I think that they're fun. Okay, sue me. I respect all kinds of horror. I do think that there is such a thing as too many jump scares. However, I think that, 1, 2, 3 in a horror movie, yes, I feel like that's fine. I feel like a lot of people actually say that they don't like jump scares just because they get scared by them, which I think is kind of a pussy thing to do. Like, you say you want to get scared, you say you want to go to a horror movie, you don't even want to get a horror movie, you don't even want to get scared. I hope you guys are respecting that I dressed up for the occasion. A quick rundown of the movie goes as follows. The movie starts with the inciting event. A bunch of kids, all at the same time, decide to T-pose, leaving their house, running into the woods at night, never to be seen again, besides one kid named Alex. All of the kids were from the exact same classroom, leading all the parents to believe that it was the fault of Ms. Gandy, their teacher. Side note, I thought her name was Miss Candy for the entire movie. It wasn't even until I looked up the cast that I realized her name was Miss Gandy, which I think is so stupid. I think that Candy is so much better. Miss Candy, Justine Candy, are you kidding me? One of the parents of the missing children, Archer Graff, decides to team up with Miss Candy to solve the disappearances, which leads us to our main antagonist, Gladys, the aunt of our sole survivor, Alex, who is a shaman-like character who arrives to Alex's parents in need and appears to be in a sickly state. However, she performs what can only be described as a spell or some kind of witchcraft to mind control people, which leads her to gathering all the kids in the basement, which in turn kind of heals her. And at the very end of the movie, Alex turns the spell back onto Gladys, and all of the kids are freed from the spell and ruthlessly rip Gladys to shreds. It was sick. It was so cool. However, at the end of the movie, while they are freed from the spell, they remain hollow shells of their former selves. All of the kids. Ugh, it's like you ever try to force up a burp, it's like terrible. What was really interesting to see, and what sets this film apart for me, was the suburban horror and the general eeriness that comes from it, both from the children's disappearances and them running out into the woods, as well as being in a small town and having everyone blame you for it. And that's not even mentioning the fact that Gladys was, up there with like Longlegs of being like extremely awesome, horror movie villain, as of recent. And, props to Jinx Monsoon for accepting the part. I think she did great. When you watch the movie, you can kind of tell that it's trying to say something. And which is why I fucking despise so much when I go on TikTok and I see a lot of people trying to tear down other people's theories or interpretations despite the more abstract themes that are shown. From what I see, a lot of people who watch the movie take it extremely literally and refuse to see it as anything else other than a fun movie with a kooky villain and disturbing themes, which is completely fine, mind you. I'm not going to be that much of a hypocrite. I would just respect you so much more if you came out and said that, other than being a dick and trying to say that all those scenes, they were just pointless, and all you people are stupid for thinking that. It just reeks of, I refuse to look at this piece of art analytically, and anyone else's interpretation is wrong. That being said, I probably shouldn't grab onto the back of that. That being said, now discussing specifically my theory of the movie, I believe it was about school shootings. As boring as that sounds, I think it was about school shootings, and Alex was the shooter. This isn't like an outlandish theory. A lot of people have this theory, but if you watch the movie like that, and you kind of see it through that lens, a lot of stuff that you watch will kind of reaffirm that theory. Getting to know Alex, we see that he's a bullied and ostracized kid with a family life that at first glance might make you think that he's a completely normal kid. However, it's a facade. There is a scene towards the end of the movie where Alex has to gather items from his classmates as it is needed for Gladys's ritual that basically mind controls people, as I said. However, Miss Gandy catches Alex in the act and offers a real heart-to-heart with him, remarking that he's been acting strangely And watching this play out, it is very creepy to see how Alex will blatantly lie to her and tell her that everything's okay and that he's fine. Meanwhile, the entire time, he is planning the demise of his fellow students. I mean, for God's sakes, his father calls him Axeman. I think that the whole theme behind the movie was that, everyone is so quick to blame other things. However, nobody wants to look at the actual problem, and that was Alex. There are a few other scenes that seem sort of abstract, but also kind of clicked for me, and that was the dream scene where Archer is wandering through his own house in sort of this astral projection-like state. However, when he leaves his house and enters the yard outside, he looks up at the sky and sees a massive AR-15, and illuminating from it was the exact time when all of the kids disappeared. I believe it was like 4:17 a.m. or something like that. And for me, the connection was simple. It was the weapon that was used, and it was the time of when it happened. Me personally, I like to think of Archer as somebody who maybe was in support of, guns and those kinds of ideals maybe. And now that all of this has happened, it all just kind of looms over him as a grim reminder of that day. While I don't think that that's necessarily true, what I just said, I just kind of think it's fun to think of. There's also another small thing I noticed, and that is the mention of parasites. There's a few mention of parasites in this movie. There is the scene when the principal and his boyfriend are watching this really gross nature documentary about a parasite that will control the minds of dead insects. And then the two other mentions of parasites are when... Scary. Do you guys see that? What the fuck? Okay, that was kind of scary. I'm getting spooked out just talking about this shit. And then there are two other mentions of parasites, but they're mainly just one. And that is when Ms. Gandy is teaching her class about parasites. I say that it's two mentions because early on in the movie, she has a dream sequence, just like Archer, of when she's going through a sort of like nightmarish version of her school. And then written on the board behind her in the class that she teaches, we see parasites written on it. However, later in the movie, we actually see her teaching that class on parasites. I feel like the implication here is that Gladys is the parasite. I mean, she kind of comes out of nowhere and sort of inserts herself instantly. However, I tend to personally lead towards the idea that Alex is the parasite, and he is just a doomed child with an ideal life, but with rotten views. And even when he could have been saved by the teacher, Miss Gandy, he denies it, already having made up his mind on what he's going to do. I think you could even make the argument that Gladys isn't even a real person or doesn't represent a real person, rather an idea of a witch hunt that ensues following such a tragic event, which literally leads us to a witch. Gladys, she's a witch. Or maybe Gladys is the parasite. I think you could also make the argument that Gladys sort of is the personified character of Alex's disturbed mind, as once Gladys arrives, then we kind of begin to see how Alex sees things and how his parents are zombies, essentially, and his house is a decrepit mess. Or the idea of how Alex might feel that he's taking care of them more than they're taking care of him. As when they get mind controlled, Alex is basically taking care of himself as well as them, feeding them, making sure they're in fresh pairs of clothes, everything. Or maybe she represents both. I don't know. I think you could see it in both ways. This theory somewhat explains the ending as well, as when the spell gets turned around on Gladys and we get one of the best villain gets their comeuppance scenes, Alex still has to deal with the problem of his parents, still being mind controlled and about to kill him. And when Ms. Gandy gets upstairs to check up on Alex, we see that Alex is hugging his parents, showing that even if Alex might see them a certain way, he still loves them. Or at least he should still love them, and then from there, everything is kind of getting reversed. I think you could also put a political spin on this movie and say that Gladys represents a certain, gun-loving side of the political spectrum. Mind controlling everybody, distracting everybody from the real problem, which again is Alex. I don't know. I don't think that any of these theories are necessarily true. I just think they're kind of fun to think about. And again, the movie is kind of abstract in its themes, so I guess that's just my interpretation. I never even really discussed James and the cop. I think his name is Hopper or some shit. I think if you want to put a political spin on this movie, or like you have that idea that has a political spin on this movie, I think that makes more sense fitting in their characters, considering that Hopper and James, Hopper's a cop, they both get mind controlled as well. One of my favorite scenes between Hopper and James is when Hopper basically assaults James right in front of his police camera. So he kind of freaks out and he, sits down with James and he basically describes, I'm going to walk away, you're going to walk away, none of us are going to talk about this, you're never going to come back to the police station and rat me out. And when we look at the scene from Hopper's perspective, he is framed, and the lighting in the cinematography and everything, he is framed as a much more virtuous person. However, when we cut to James's perspective, it is gross and up close to his face, and we see him how grimy he is actually being. I don't know. Other than that, in some hilarious scenes of James being thrown around like a rag doll when he's being mind controlled, I think that Hopper and James are good characters. James was probably my favorite character besides Gladys. All in all, I think this movie was great. I loved it. I would probably give it frickin' flippin' like 7 scarecrows out of 10. And that's where we're going to leave it. We're going to put a little thing down there. It's going to say 7 crows out of 10. And we're going to leave it at that. 10 being the best, 1 being the lowest. Goodbye.